everyone, this is Melissa from Melissa Made, and today I'm going to be making a small card again, but today I'm going to be doing something a little bit new. I'm going to be using the A Garden set from Close to My Heart, and the little stamp set I'm going to be using is this little vase and these little flowers here. But the new thing I'm going to be doing is using some of this new paper that I got from Copic. It's the Ranger Inkssential surface. It's specialty stamping paper. It's really smooth, and I'm going to be using it with my Distress inks. And the ones that I picked out are the mustard seed, the peeled paint, the spiced marmalade, broken china. I'm also going to be using some StazOn and one of these watercolor brushes that are filled with water. This paper is really good for distressed inks and water, and it doesn't pucker. It actually keeps the paper nice and smooth, and that's what it's made for. Probably the new distress markers as well by Tim Holtz, but I don't have those yet, so I'm going to be using my distress inks with the watercolor brush. I also have a sheet of basil paper here. This is called Safari, and it matches the peeled paint pretty well. The other thing you're going to need is a porous surface, and this has some of my distressed ink already stamped on it. This is the peeled paint that I'm going to use first, so I just turned the ink pad over and pressed it down, and then I added a little drop of water there. But I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this little sheet. This is the ATC size that comes with the Inkssentials paper, and I'll provide a link for you in case you're interested. And again, I'm going to be using the Close to My Heart stamp, the little vase and the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that right in the center of this with my StazOn ink. It's important to use an ink that's not going to run, so if I would try and stamp with the black distress ink first with the image and then went to paint, it would smear all out. StazOn will not run with water, so it's a good one to use for distress inks and watercoloring. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that, and I'll come right back and show you how I watercolor on this new paper from Ranger. Okay, so I'm back, and I'm going to go ahead and start stamping onto the Essentials paper from Tim Holtz or Ranger. And I picked up some StazOn my flowers, and I gently stamp it down. Now this paper is very smooth and slick, so you have to be careful when you stamp because of the smooth surface. It's easy to get kind of a smear or slip. So I'm going to go ahead and put the vase on my acrylic block now from the Close to My Heart stamp set, and I'm going to add a little bit more StazOn, and I'm going to cover up the StazOn. Anyone who's used StazOn before knows you get it on something that's really hard to get off. So I added that to my vase, and now I'm going to find the perfect place to stamp it down, again being very careful because of the slip paper. And I'm going to apply gentle pressure to my stamp and then kind of smush it back and forth just a little bit and then pick it back up, and I have a nice stamped image. And I'm going to go ahead and start adding my watercolors to this. The StazOn dries fairly fast, so you can see in the time that it takes me to get the block ready and the ink on there that it is actually dry. StazOn again is the best ink to use with, or one of the best inks to use with the distress inks because it is not going to run when you add water to it. Now if I would add Copics to StazOn, it's going to smear and ruin my markers, so never use StazOn with your Copics, but it's great with distress inks. So I've got my clean acrylic block here, and I'm going to take the peeled paint and add a few taps to my acrylic block, and then I'm going to take my watercolor brush here and go ahead and pick up some of the ink. But first I want to kind of clean my brush, so I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of water and rub my brush tip in it, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit of that color. Now I want my brush a little bit dry here, not so wet, because if you touch it to these leaves too wet, it's going to go outside the lines. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color here. It's kind of hard to put a lot of definition into these small leaves. And that's about all the peeled paint I'm actually going to use here. So you can see me clean my brush off a little bit, squeeze a little bit more water, clean that peeled paint off, because I'm going to go now and use the mustard seed distress ink, and I don't want any green in that. So I'm going to stamp down a little bit of mustard seed, and I'm going to dry my paintbrush off a little bit on a rag so it's not too wet. Again, if it's too wet, the color's not as vibrant. I'm going to go in and pick up a little bit of that and add it gently to my flower. And if you want a darker color, it's best to have a really dry brush. If you want it a little bit lighter, you can thin it out with some water. I'm just gently going to add a little bit of color here to these flowers with the mustard seed. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit here with my camera because I want you to be able to see this a little bit closer. So you can see the color goes on really nice on this paper. I'm actually really impressed. I've used watercolor paper with Distress Inks too, and it always puckers, and this paper is not puckering at all. So I'm going to go ahead and get my orange, which is spiced marmalade, and I'm going to stamp that onto my block and go in and add a little bit. Now what I'm doing with my finger there is touching it just to make sure that color is dry on there. It's already dried because when I add the orange I don't want it to blend too much with the yellow. So you can see I'm just putting some orange next to the center of the flower where there's going to be a little bit darker color. And I'm drying my brush occasionally too so it's not too wet, because if it's too wet it'll just fan out and then you'll miss that nice color. You can see me kind of moving the front of the color around until I get it where I want it, and I kind of like this just like it is. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my other distress ink that I use, which is Broken China. It's a nice blue color. Glass, as you know, has a little bit of a color when there's some reflective light on it, and blue is often a good color to use, or some color of green. I'm going to stamp the Broken China on my acrylic block again, just like I did before, and I'm going to add a little bit of water to this because I want the color to be a little bit clearer to start with. I'm going to go in and just add a little bit of this blue color as a reflection on the sides. The thing with working with watercolors like this or distress inks is you see that front there that I'm kind of pushing down. Oftentimes with watercolors, if you leave that front, it's going to dry and you're not going to be able to move it anymore. You're always going to have kind of a harsh line there. Oops, I've added a little bit too much. So I'm going to dry off my brush and pull a little bit of that down. Again, you can see the front I'm working with. But as soon as I let that front dry a little bit, it's going to be too hard to come back in and get rid of it. So you always want to work with a wet front when you're working with watercolors. I'm going to go ahead and pull this color down and around the other side as well so the image looks round. And again, moving that front of blue down. And so I kind of like the look of this now. It looks like a rounded base. I'm going to add a little bit more color here. And then I think the last thing I'd like to do after adding a little bit more, pulling that front down, is I think I'm going to go ahead and color that heart a blue color as well, just to give it a little more pop of color. I like the blue. I'm going to add this to some My Mind's Eye paper that I forgot to mention in the beginning, and it has some blue in the paper, and so I think this will make a really nice addition. Now I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to go ahead and stamp a sentiment at the bottom. I'm going to cut it and add it to a matting, that green safari paper that I showed you, and finish up my card. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll show you pictures of the final card in a minute. Have a great day.